You know him well. Will he be arrested tomorrow?
I don't think he'll necessarily be arrested tomorrow. There may be another witness before the grand jury. There are all kinds of technical things that need to be done, but I think it's a matter of days before he will be indicted. He won't be arrested as such, but he has to surrender to authorities to answer to the indictment, and that could come this week. Whether it's tomorrow, I think, is just it's just a matter of time.
And how damaging would that be for him and his plans to be the next president?
I think for Trump, unfortunately, they're very positive, and for the Republican Party, it's bad news because Trump is trying to persuade his followers that he's being persecuted, that the prosecutor is a partisan Democrat. And if he's indicted, he's actually urged them to come into the streets, which is very dangerous. I think if Trump is indicted and acquitted, it's rocket fuel to his campaign to get the Republican nomination for president. And that's what gives rise to the theory that many people, even those who do not support Trump, think it's a Democratic conspiracy because Donald Trump is the Democratic Party's best asset. If he's nominated for the 2024 nomination for the presidency, that will almost guarantee a Democratic win.
But if he's written on his site, protest, 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 is that not potentially inciting violence?
Well, I think that's exactly what he has in mind. He saw what he was able to do on January the 6th, 2021, and I think there's a very real risk. This is what he wants. This is the kind of publicity that enables him to say, I'm being persecuted, you're being persecuted because of me. It really feeds on the animosity many people have toward the government. But
is that not in itself an arrestable offense?
Well, you know, we have a First Amendment in the United States. You've got to go a long way to say that somebody really is inciting violence, saying protest, protest, protest. We have a long history of protest for perfectly good reasons. So Trump is covering himself, and we'll have to see what happens. I think the real question is whether, if he is indicted, he's convicted, because I do think that changes things. 2 weeks of testimony about how he paid hush money to a porn star because of an extramarital affair and then cooked his company's books.
But that's what he's being indicted for, isn't it? It's not paying the money. It's allegedly cooking the books.
It's financial fraud. And, you know, his base in 2016 and 2020 consisted of a lot of evangelical Christians who wanted conservatives nominated to the courts to help overturn Roe v. Wade. That has now happened. I think 2 weeks of displaying Stormy Daniels on television will help move that base away from Trump. So he has risk here as well. But the Democrats want to see him nominated as the Republican nominee. And this case would not have been the first one brought if you had one prosecutor looking at all the things that are now being investigated. This may be the case most favorable to Trump.
You've previously said, sat here, that if you don't think he'll run, and if he does run, he won't win. Do you still think so?
Well, he is running now. I think it's...
From having said he's going to run to actually running, there's a world of difference.
That's right, and he still hasn't filed the necessary paperwork. But what for Trump is absolutely essential is A, staying in the spotlight, and B, not being a loser. And it's the fear of losing, I think, that could still keep him out of the race actively. There are a number of other legal investigations that are closing in on him that are likely more attractive to people around the country to show that he's not fit to be president. The porn star affair isn't necessarily the one to do it, and that's a question. If the prosecutors had worked this out among themselves, this case might not be the one going forward.
Are you still going to run?
Well, I'm still considering it for the reason that I don't think Donald Trump is fit to be president, and I think his nomination by the Republican Party would be a gift from God for the Democrats.
Can we move on and talk about President Putin? An arrest warrant for him. What's going to happen?
Well, nothing will happen. I believe, and have for many years, the International Criminal Court is fundamentally illegitimate. It's not something the United States should cooperate with.
Why?
This is not in any way to excuse Putin's conduct of the war, but there are jurisdictions that can try him, Ukraine in particular, and ultimately a free Russia to try him. The International Criminal Court is illegitimate because it is an exercise of governmental power in a vacuum without any constitutional framework to restrain it. And it's a very dangerous institution. And I think the conduct of the International Criminal Court is potentially threatening, at this point, to a diplomatic solution in Ukraine. If you want negotiations to take place, do you think an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin makes it more likely or less likely he will negotiate? This free electron out there, divorced from political control, and I mean that in the constitutional sense, I think is more of a menace than an aid.
So you have a beef with the ICC, but do you think if an arrest warrant was issued by another authority then that you feel would be legitimate, that would be appropriate?
Well, I think Ukraine could certainly issue an arrest warrant. The issue, though, is do you really want to try Vladimir Putin in absentia? That's the kind of stab in the back circumstances that give rise to an authoritarian being able to enhance his own standing in domestic politics. The real ultimate justice here for this is going to have to come from a new Russian government at some point. And I think it inhibits the emergence of political maturity when you tell a country in whose name crimes have been committed, we're going to take the burden of judging your leaders off you. They are precisely the people who should make that judgment, as Iraq made the judgment to convict and execute Saddam Hussein.
How twitchy should America be about the fact that the Chinese president is going to Moscow today?
Well, I think this is further evidence of the Entente developing into an axis between Moscow and Beijing, with China very much as the senior partner. I think it gives the lie to the idea that China is kind of offended by Russia's invasion in Ukraine, that it's trying to put distance between itself and Russia. China has been in Russia's court on this from the get-go, and this is another affirmation of it. Xi Jinping may be trying to float a quote-unquote peace plan, but I will guarantee it'll be a plan that, while it may appear fair and balanced on the surface, is entirely beneficial to Russia.
Talking about heavy weapons potentially being used on the battlefield in Ukraine?
Well, I think China's given assistance to Russia in many...
But not weaponry, not heavy weapons.
But I think that's a distinction without a difference. If you give resources, money or other resources that are fungible, it just frees up Russian resources to do more on heavy weapons.
Talk to me about the fact that it is the 20th anniversary of the start of the Iraq War. Speaking to Lord Ricketts, who you may know, he was very much involved at the time in the Foreign Office. Do you feel that it was a pointless war?
No, it was absolutely the right thing to do. And the period of major combat operations between today, March 20th, and May 1st, was an extraordinarily successful and professional effort to remove Saddam Hussein, who was a threat to international peace and security by his pursuit of nuclear weapons. The fact that Saddam Hussein is dead and that Iraq does not have nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons today is a huge advance for peace and security around the world. You cannot treat the 20 years from 2003 to today as a single block of granite. Everything flowing from the decision to invade. In fact, I would say the worst mistake that the United States made, and we did make a number of mistakes, there's no doubt about it. The worst mistake was in 2011 when Barack Obama withdrew all American forces from Iraq and eliminated the measure of stability inside that country that in fact facilitated the rise of ISIS that required Obama to go back in 2014. I think if we had stayed, things would have been substantially different.
And how much of a mistake was it to withdraw troops then from Afghanistan?
It was a catastrophic strategic mistake. We created a vacuum in Central Asia that China and Russia will try to fill. It enhanced the possibility the terrorists would once again go to Afghanistan, which is exactly what they're doing. It eliminated our ability to watch the nuclear programs in Pakistan and Iran from close up. And what it's done to the people of Afghanistan, the women in particular, is just incalculably damaging.
OK, let's head back west again. Moldova, how concerned are you about that?
Well, I'm very concerned about Moldova and the Russian efforts through the so-called Transnistria Republic to subvert the government. I went to Moldova in August of 2019, shortly before I resigned from the White House, because I was concerned about what would happen to it then. And I think the invasion of Ukraine by the Russians sets up the possibility that they will try and subvert the government in Moldova and be able to put even more Russian troops on Ukraine's western flank. This is an enormously important development, and it presages further Russian efforts throughout the former Soviet Union to recreate not the USSR, but the Russian Empire if their aggression in Ukraine is not stopped.
And just moving even further west, back to your home country, I think you're heading back on Wednesday, aren't you? How concerned should the United States be about these spy balloons, so-called spy balloons? Were you overreacting there?
No, I don't think we were overreacting. In fact, I think the Biden administration should have shot the balloon down as it crossed the coast of Alaska. There's a lot of speculation about what this was all about, but I think the most likely is that China was trying to consider what would happen in a crisis or a period of hostilities when we blinded their satellites in space and they blinded ours. These high-altitude balloons are a poor substitute for satellites, but they're better than nothing. And it occurs to me that we and the West as a whole ought to be looking at whether we need that capability,
Why do
too.
we need them, though? I mean, apparently there are satellites that can see car number plates from space. What's the point in these spy balloons?
Because if in a wartime situation anti-satellite weapons destroyed that satellite capability, you would need alternatives. Now, we have the U-2, which is still one of the best spy planes ever invented. But the balloon possibility is something I think we need to think about more.